My brother stole my inheritance after I paid off our family home. Now he's begging, and I walked away without looking back. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and for years I've been the one holding my family together. Growing up, our house was always too small, the bills always too high, and the fridge never fully stocked. My parents worked tirelessly, but somehow it never seemed to be enough. My younger brother, Alex, somehow got away with doing almost nothing. He was charming, funny, and everyone adored him. I, on the other hand, learned early that responsibility didn't wait for anyone. I took on odd jobs after school, worked weekends, and eventually juggled multiple roles just to keep the household afloat. I remember the evenings I'd come home exhausted, counting bills on the kitchen table under the flickering light, making sure the rent was covered and the utilities didn't slip past due. Mom would sigh in relief, Dad would nod appreciatively, and Alex would saunter in, phone in hand, casually asking for money for some urgent thing he needed. And I always said yes, because that's what I believed family was about. I paid off old debts quietly, fixed broken appliances with my own hands, and made sure no one ever went without. There was pride in it. Sure, a sense that I was doing the right thing, but there was also a gnawing exhaustion I could never shake. The tension between Alex and me was subtle, like a shadow I couldn't quite catch. He'd joke about my serious mood when I reminded him about chores or bills, and I'd laugh along. I wondered sometimes if my sacrifices were invisible, if anyone even noticed the constant hours, the constant stress I carried alone. Yet I never complained. Family always came first, and I believed that if I just kept going, things would eventually even out. But lately, I couldn't help but notice a certain spark in Alex's eyes, one that hinted he knew exactly how much I did for everyone. And I had this sinking feeling that one day my loyalty might be tested in a way I wasn't ready for. I remember the day I decided to pay off the family home entirely. It wasn't a spur of a moment thing. It took years of scrimping, working overtime, and sacrificing almost every personal luxury I'd ever wanted. I juggled 2 jobs for a while, picking up shifts that left me drained and barely able to eat properly, all while making sure Alex and my parents never noticed the strain. To me, the house wasn't just walls and a roof, it was security, stability, a symbol that my efforts actually mattered. Every late-night call to the bank, every carefully calculated transfer, felt like a step toward freedom for everyone, even if no one else would ever understand how heavy the weight was on my shoulders. Alex, of course, acted like it was all expected. "You always handle the boring stuff anyway," he'd say with that grin, tossing a video game controller onto the couch. Mom would glance at me with a tired smile, and Dad would pat my shoulder, proud but silent. I didn't mind their quiet approval, it was enough. But Alex's words, those casual dismissals, they gnawed at me. Sometimes I wondered if he ever realized what I was giving up just to keep our family afloat. I kept it in check, told myself I didn't need recognition, that doing the right thing was reward enough. There were moments, though, when I'd sit alone in the darkened living room, staring at the mortgage papers spread across the coffee table, and feel the exhaustion press down like a physical weight. The numbers on the page weren't just numbers, they were years of sweat, skipped meals, sleepless nights, and personal sacrifices. I couldn't help but imagine how proud my younger self would be, knowing I had carried the family through storms I didn't ask for. And yet, there was a tiny nagging thought at the back of my mind every time Alex mentioned one day, "It'll be mine too," like a subtle warning I couldn't ignore. I tried to shake it off, thinking I was imagining things, but deep down, I felt a flicker of unease. Something told me that paying off this house wasn't just about security. It was setting the stage for a reckoning I wasn't ready to face. It started with small things, the kind of moments that make you question your own perception. Alex would disappear for hours, sometimes late into the night, claiming he was out with friends or helping a colleague with a project. But there was something off his casual grin, the way he avoided my questions, the faint tension in his voice when I asked where he'd been. At first I brushed it off. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was normal for him to have a social life that I didn't fully understand. But the unease kept growing, gnawing at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. One evening, I caught a glimpse of his phone screen just as he slammed it shut when I walked by. There were messages I couldn't read, names I didn't recognize, but the secrecy hit me like a gut punch. "You're overthinking it," I muttered to myself, trying to force it out of my mind. Yet that spark of doubt stayed, sitting heavy in my chest. I felt a mix of frustration and helplessness. How could someone so close be hiding things from me, especially after everything I'd done to hold this family together? Alex's charm made it worse. He knew how to deflect, how to turn a question into a joke, how to make me second-guess myself. "Relax, man, you worry too much," he'd say, slapping my shoulder with that easy grin as if my concerns were childish. And I'd nod, swallowing my irritation, forcing myself to believe him. But deep down, I couldn't shake the suspicion that he was quietly plotting, testing boundaries I didn't even realize existed. Then came the comment that made my stomach twist. Alex casually said, "You've done so much for this house. I just hope one day I get to enjoy it too." It was light, almost teasing, but there was an edge to it, a subtle claim wrapped in a smile. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my sacrifices were really appreciated or if they were just feeding a sense of entitlement I was blind to. Something told me that the life I'd built for my family might not be as secure as I thought. When my parents passed, I thought my world would collapse in grief. But I also assumed naively, as it turns out, that everything I'd worked for would carry forward as I intended. After years of sacrificing my youth, my energy, and my nights of sleep to pay off our family home, I expected at least some acknowledgement, some understanding that this house was my lifeline as much as it was theirs. Instead, what I got felt like a punch straight to the chest. Alex appeared calm, almost as calm, as he handed me a stack of legal papers. My heart sank as I skimmed the documents. Joint ownership claims, signatures I didn't remember being signed, subtle manipulations in the phrasing that favored him entirely. It was surreal. I stared at him, my mind racing. "Alex, what is this?" My voice cracked, despite my attempt to stay composed. He shrugged with that disarming smirk. "It's just paperwork. Mom and Dad wanted it fair, right? Fair." I had poured my life into this house, and he acted as though he had an equal hand in its survival. I felt a wave of disbelief and betrayal hit me all at once. My sacrifices, my sweat, the endless nights counting bills and covering debts, it was all invisible to him, and maybe even to my parents, whose grief seemed to have left them passive, silent. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in with the weight of the injustice. Everything I had done to secure our family's future had been quietly, meticulously undermined by the one person I'd trusted to care, my own brother. And then it clicked. The casual comments, the secretive calls, the late nights he had hidden from all of it wasn't harmless. It was calculated. Alex hadn't stumbled into this. He had planned it. My stomach turned. I realized with cold clarity that this wasn't a mistake. This was a betrayal I had never imagined, one that struck at the very core of my loyalty and trust. I clenched the papers, feeling both rage and numbness, and I knew the path forward would be anything but simple. I couldn't just confront him. I had to understand how deep this went. I couldn't hold it in anymore. That night, I found Alex in the living room, scrolling lazily on his phone, completely unaware of the storm brewing behind my eyes. "We need to talk," I said, my voice tight but steady. He looked up, feigning surprise, and gave me that infuriating grin. "About what?" he asked, as if nothing was wrong. My hands shook as I pushed the papers toward him. All of this, you can't seriously think this is okay." Alex leaned back, pretending to read, then looked up with mock innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about. Mom and Dad. It's all fair, right? Nothing shady here." I felt my chest tighten, the words burning in my throat. "Fair? You stole years of my life, Alex. I paid off this house. I worked myself to the bone for this family. And you," I stopped, realizing that anger alone wasn't enough. His smug calmness made my frustration feel useless, like shouting into a wall. My parents sat silently on the couch behind him. Mom's eyes were watery, but she didn't intervene. Dad gave me a weak, apologetic nod, the kind that said he was torn but unwilling to upset Alex. The betrayal stung twice as hard, first Alex's calculated manipulation, then my parents' passive acceptance. "You're overreacting," Alex said, finally, voice casual. "We're family. You're just intense sometimes." His words were ice in my veins. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him feel even a fraction of the helplessness I felt, but it wouldn't have mattered. He had the upper hand. He knew exactly how to twist reality, and I was trapped in the mess of my own loyalty and moral code. I left that night feeling hollow, a mixture of rage, shock, and utter disbelief. I'd thought confronting him would change something, make him see reason, make my parents see the truth. But instead, it only made me realize how deep his manipulation went and how alone I truly was. And as I closed the door behind me, I couldn't shake the gnawing thought. This was far from over, and I had no idea how bad it would get. After that failed confrontation, I couldn't ignore the feeling that Alex had been manipulating more than just the house. I started noticing things I had brushed off before: bank transfers, bills that didn't add up, little lies that piled up into a mountain of suspicion. Every casual comment he made now felt loaded, every smile hiding something I wasn't meant to see. I began keeping track of his movements, documenting everything I could: calls, emails, text messages, even the subtle ways he tried to frame me as overly dramatic in front of our parents. One evening, I was going through some old financial statements and froze. There it was, a transaction that didn't make sense, tied directly to him. My stomach dropped. The realization hit me like a punch. Alex hadn't just quietly benefited from my work. He'd been carefully, methodically planning his take from the very beginning, laying the groundwork while I bled myself dry to keep the family afloat. All those times I had thought his charm and humor were harmless. They were a smokescreen. I confronted him again, this time armed with evidence. But he simply smiled, leaned back, and said, "You really think you know everything, don't you?" The audacity left me reeling. It wasn't just the theft, it was the calculation, the way he'd toyed with me and everyone else, like he was performing a long, cruel experiment. Every corner of the house, every document I touched felt tainted now. Trust became a stranger. I felt eyes on me constantly, as if he was waiting for a misstep, a sign of weakness he could exploit. My parents, still passive, only added to the sense of isolation. I realized with a sinking heart that this betrayal was bigger than I thought, was systemic, built over years, and I had been blind to it. That night, staring at the ceiling, I felt a cold clarity. I couldn't confront him emotionally anymore. I needed a plan, patience, and control. But even as I told myself that, a flicker of dread passed through me. Alex was still out there, smiling, and the real reckoning hadn't even begun. By the time the week had passed, I felt completely alone. Friends tried to check in, but I couldn't bring myself to explain the mess. How my own brother had slowly poisoned the foundation of everything I'd built. Even the people closest to me couldn't grasp the weight of it, and that only made the isolation worse. Every phone call, every knock on the door, felt like a reminder that my world had become a minefield, and one wrong step could ignite a new wave of betrayal. I spent nights pacing the house, staring at the walls I had worked so hard to pay off, realizing that none of it truly belonged to me anymore. The air seemed heavier, the familiar creaks of the floorboards now deafening. My parents remained passive, seemingly lost in grief or denial, leaving me with the full brunt of my anger and despair. And Alexei walked around like he owned everything, casually dropping comments that pushed my patience to the edge. The rock-bottom moment hit when I sat alone at the kitchen table, the papers in front of me, and thought about giving up entirely, sell my car, sell my belongings, walk away from the house, from the memories, from the family that seemed incapable of seeing the truth. I felt crushed, like every ounce of effort, loyalty, and sacrifice had been absorbed into a void where no one would ever acknowledge it. I even wondered bitterly if maybe I deserved this if my constant responsibility had blinded me to the inevitable betrayal. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was mental and emotional, a fog that clung to my thoughts, making it impossible to see any way forward. I realized I was at the bottom, the point where despair and helplessness had fully claimed me, yet in that darkness, a tiny ember of resolve flickered. I couldn't undo what had happened, but maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to take control, a way to make sure that, when the dust settled, I wouldn't be the one left broken. But the path forward was murky, and I had no idea how I'd navigate it. After hitting that low point, I knew I couldn't rely on emotion anymore. Rage alone wouldn't undo years of manipulation. And screaming at Alex or begging my parents for justice had only left me drained and ignored. I needed a plan, a careful, calculated response that would shift the power back to me without letting him know I'd caught on. The first step was documenting everything: financial records, transactions, text messages, emails, and even small verbal slips that revealed his true intentions. Every detail mattered. Every lie he had told became a piece of the puzzle. I spent hours late into the night, organizing the evidence, cross-referencing dates, and creating a timeline of how Alex had orchestrated this theft. The more I uncovered, the more sickened I felt, but also more determined. I realized that he hadn't stumbled into this by chance. It was deliberate, methodical, and he thought no one would ever notice. That realization fueled a quiet fire inside me. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming control of my life and refusing to let him dictate the narrative any longer. I also began to watch him more closely. Not aggressively, but with careful attention to his routines, habits, and weaknesses. I knew that patience would be my ally. Acting too soon could backfire, and I wasn't about to hand him another opportunity to manipulate the situation. My focus shifted from anger to strategy. I wasn't seeking petty revenge. I was preparing for the moment when justice could be delivered in a way that couldn't be ignored. Even with this clarity, there was an undercurrent of doubt that I couldn't shake. Alex was unpredictable, cunning, and always a step ahead in charm and deception. But one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let him win. I refused to be the powerless one any longer. And as I sat there, surrounded by stacks of papers and my own thoughts, I realized that the real reckoning hadn't arrived yet, but when it did, it would be mine to control. Over the next few weeks, I began taking steps that were almost invisible to everyone else, but devastatingly effective. I secured my finances, moved accounts into my name only, and tightened every loophole that Alex might exploit. Slowly, meticulously, I reclaimed control over the aspects of our lives he had tried to dominate. I felt a quiet satisfaction in these small victories, a sense of empowerment that I hadn't realized I'd been craving. Each adjustment, each careful move, chipped away at the illusion of his dominance. Though he didn't yet know it, the shift wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like water eroding stone. But I could feel it. Alex's casual confidence began to falter slightly. He miscalculated, made small mistakes, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty flash in his eyes. Meanwhile, I stayed calm, detached, deliberately letting him overextend while I stayed in the shadows, building my strategy piece by piece. I reminded myself constantly that the goal wasn't to humiliate him immediately, but to set the stage so that when the moment came, it would be undeniable and irreversible. At home, everything seemed ordinary on the surface. Parents remained blissfully unaware of the undercurrents. Alex carried on with his charm and bluster, and I kept my observations quiet. But the emotional satisfaction was mine alone. Each day I felt lighter, more in control, and surprisingly, more at peace. I realized that empowerment didn't need to be loud. It was quiet, internal, and unstoppable once nurtured correctly. And then, inevitably, Alex started making moves that betrayed his panic. Offhand comments became sharper, questions more pointed, and there was a desperation in the way he tried to manipulate conversations. He didn't know I was watching, didn't know I was ready. The anticipation was intoxicating. I knew the tipping point was coming, the moment when all the careful planning would collide with his arrogance. But even as I prepared for it, a part of me couldn't help but wonder when the reckoning arrived, would it be satisfying enough to heal all the wounds he had caused? The moment finally came one evening, quieter than I expected, but no less intense. Alex had overreached, leaving a paper trail and making missteps that even his charm couldn't cover. I confronted him calmly. Armed with everything I had, meticulously gathered the proof of his manipulation. The evidence of his deceit, the undeniable documentation of his years of planning. For once, he had nowhere to hide. His confident smirk faltered almost immediately. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he stammered, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. He began begging, pleading, twisting his words in desperation. I just thought, you wouldn't notice. I was going to fix it. I swear. But I could see through the facade. This wasn't regret, and it was panic, the kind that comes only when someone realizes they've lost control for the first time in their life. The rawness of his fear hit me in an unexpected way. I had imagined this moment for months, rehearsed my words, envisioned every reaction, but seeing him crumble, hearing the tremor in his voice, it was more visceral than I had anticipated. Yet, despite the satisfaction bubbling in my chest, I felt no gloating. My goal wasn't to humiliate him, it was to reclaim what was rightfully mine and finally set boundaries that he could no longer cross. I stayed composed, letting him ramble, letting him apologize and twist, letting him beg, while silently absorbing the reality that the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The house, the family, my life, it was mine to protect now. Every lie, every betrayal, every sleepless night he had caused was finally balanced by the control I now held. When he finally paused, out of breath and broken, I looked at him with steady eyes. "It's too late," I said quietly. "There's nothing you can do anymore." And as he slumped in defeat, I realized that the weight I had carried for years, the exhaustion, the betrayal, the anger, was finally lifting. The reckoning had come. But even as relief washed over me, a part of me knew this wasn't just about victory, it was about learning to protect myself from ever being powerless again. Looking back now, months after the dust settled, I can barely recognize the person I was when this all began. The exhaustion, the endless sacrifices, the sleepless nights spent keeping a family afloat. They shaped me, but they didn't define me. I've rebuilt my life on my terms, without letting anyone else dictate my worth or manipulate my loyalty. The house, once a battlefield of deceit, is now a sanctuary, a symbol not of sacrifice for others, but of the strength I discovered within myself. I've learned lessons that can't be taught in books. Trust must be earned, boundaries must be enforced, and self-respect is not negotiable. Alex's betrayal was painful, yes, but it forced me to confront my own limits and realize that protecting yourself sometimes means stepping away from those you love. I've grown into someone who no longer fears conflict or manipulation because I understand my value, my power, and the importance of controlling my own narrative emotionally. I found a strange kind of peace. The anger and resentment that once threatened to consume me have softened into clarity. I no longer replay every slight or every manipulation in my mind. Instead, I use the memory as a compass, guiding my decisions and reinforcing the importance of vigilance, patience, and self-preservation. Sometimes, I think about Alex, and I feel no joy or gloating, just recognition of the choices he made and the consequences he earned. I've let go of needing him, of needing approval from anyone who couldn't see my efforts when they mattered most. The freedom that comes with walking away, with taking control of your own life, is a lesson worth every sleepless night, every pang of betrayal, every moment I doubted myself. Now I focus on the future, on growth, on building a life that is mine, entirely secure, unshakable, and free from the chains of others' deceit. And in that quiet, confident space, I finally feel whole again, knowing that I survived, I learned, and I came out stronger than I ever imagined possible.